All right, so
Starting.
today is February 7th, 2021, and we'll just have this as an open discussion. Go ahead. Oh, you're muted, Gary.
Will we start that again, or do you want to just pick up somewhere here? Or
Oh
how do
yeah,
you want
no,
to do that?
yeah, just pick up from where you were. We were having a discussion on the virus, and yeah, just go for it again.
Um, what we were saying was that in Australia, there's a Conservative politician. His name is Craig Kelly, and he's recently been making rather vocal statements about the use of ivermectin and hydrochloroquine for treating the early stages of the virus infection. And he's been universally howled down by everybody in Parliament and in the media. Um, as some kind of a nutter with an alternative agenda, um, and uh, this went on for a few days in the media until eventually a high-profile professor at one of the universities, I think it was biomedical and pharmaceutical aspects that he was qualified in. He came out independently and made a statement in support of this politician, basically saying that there is a proven track record for, at least for ivermectin, for use in the early stages of the virus. And yet, even this fellow was basically, shoved under the carpet. Nobody wanted to hear this. It was clearly a case of it didn't matter whether this made sense or whether it was worthwhile. Nobody was going to bother even investigating it because they all seemed absorbed in their agenda just to call this guy a nutter, and basically just saying, well, the vaccine is the way to go, and everything else is going to get ignored. And I think I mentioned the what's called the Therapeutic Goods Association, which is in Australia is like, what's the name of the organization in America? The Food and Drug Administration. I think it's kind of like it's kind of a parallel to the Food and Drug Administration. It's supposed to be a body that's got representation from conventional medicine and anybody else who's got a concern with health. Health and well-being, but that's only the theory. In practice, it's stacked up to the eyeballs with pharmaceutical lackeys, and it was very interesting that they came out and said that they weren't in support of the use of ivermectin, and that they didn't think there was any credible research, and yet I think Hughes put up a video about that South African lady, or was it in Harare somewhere? That lady, the video you put up, and other people have put things up, and the basis of it is that there's quite a good body of research for that drug actually, and it's pretty easy to find it if you want to read about it. But basically, the point I was getting to was this sort of the way rational discussion is just locked out, and the dominant agenda has just got to go ahead. Whether the dominant agenda is the best one or not, we don't care. We're sort of committed to this vaccine pathway and nothing else, and that's the way it's going to be. So I think that just about encapsulates what we were doing before the recording started, at any rate.
Isn't it extraordinary how everything has aligned to suppress freedom of speech, and censorship is just waves of censorship have just come in. It's gone from free speech to what I remember in South Africa, where everything was controlled. It's just happened almost with the snap of the fingers. It's incredible how it's unfolded, and how it's coordinated. I mean, it's like weren't there supposed to be no conspiracies or anything, and now we've got to use you can't even use the word vaccine or something. You've got to use Greek letters and stuff just to, so things aren't auto-removed. It's like being in China. It's unbelievable how quickly it's taken up.
Yeah, I was also thinking about from a slightly different perspective, which is the way the media was enjoying having a feeding frenzy, demolishing this guy, and I wonder too whether there's what lies behind the tendency to want to scapegoat people is this kind of anger, and it's a way of venting it, and so I often wonder whether the people who are trashing someone like that really want to trash that person, or whether they've just found a way to vent all their frustrations and angers. Whether it's a kind of a psychological outlet for them. They're just going to lash out at whatever's there that they can have a go at. Because, when you look at the kind of society we live in, and maybe this will bring us back towards the chimp discussion, we're very restricted in the way we can express a strong emotion. And the society is very repressive. You've got, and and then when something comes along that you think you can take a swipe at, even though it's unreasonable, a lot of people are going to jump at that opportunity, to just sort of express themselves because not just even under normal circumstances, but even more so with the virus, when people are both literally and psychologically more confined than normal. It's building up this pressure.
Yeah, it's. Did you ever see The Crucible about the Salem witch trials?
Yeah.
I often feel like I'm in the Crucible or something like
Crucible.
that. It's dreadful how quickly people just trash principle, especially principle of freedom of expression, just because it's their side. So what if they win the election, then it can't be rigged. If whatever you say, if they're against Trump, then anything's a conspiracy theory or witch hunt. Then just like burn them bastards, ban them, cancel them, and so well. I mean, I don't like Alex Jones and I don't like Trump and stuff, but it's Payne's thing where it says like, I don't like what the guy says, but I would stake my life to allow him to say it. And it's like everybody is like, no, we just don't care about who the person is or what they. It's just, are they saying what I'm saying? If not, then just blow them away. They don't have rights. Just kill them.
But the thing is, they're creating another crucible by shutting down on things. They've created another pressure cooker for all the people who are sort of silenced. And I mean, I think you and a lot of other people were saying this about the Trump situation, that the more you shut it down, the more ultimately you're going to end up paying for it. So you're lurching from one bad situation. You can't, the cure, it's a little bit like the civilization in general, is the cure for it isn't more of it. It's got to be something quite different.
Yeah, I'm kind of just upset that the left thinks that there's no price for this. They think that basically it's kind of like their right to silence people and cancel people and suppress them. And they think that there's no reaction, there's no price to it. And basically it comes for free. If you don't like somebody, you've got to, or what something somebody says or it hurts your feelings, you've got an absolute right to shut that down with no recourse or consequence. And saying that, well, no, the whole Trump phenomena was a backlash against identity politics and all this, you can't just ignore that connection, and people seem to. That's I don't know why nobody seems to be calling that out, but I don't see anybody saying, Trump, a backlash is what you get. There's a price to pay. I don't see anybody saying there's a price to pay for identity politics.
It's like we're caught in this perpetual action, what revolution and counter revolution. Yeah, well, we can't, like, it's like a pendulum. You've got to, it's always going to an extreme. Then there's a reaction to that extreme, and it's going back to the other extreme, and there's no modulation. There's no sorry, I kind of lost it there. But I mean, the thing is, you know, you've got to look at a civilization that's swinging from revolution to counter-revolution all the time. It's going to be doomed anyway. How can it possibly do anything constructive?
Well, I think they all did that. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in one of her last interviews before she passed away, she said, you know, it doesn't matter about the Supreme Court going Republican, and she said basically it's a pendulum and it just swings back and forth. I think this is really on topic here, because what I contend is that we have to change course. And that pendulum swinging back and forth is homeostatic. It just basically, it keeps on, keeps everything on the same path. So that we're stuck in a rut where this pendulum just goes back and forth forever. Whereas we need to change course. And it's very difficult now to do anything other than swing the pendulum. So it's, you know, you need to find paradigm breaking kind of strategies at this point. But there's not. Everybody wants to shift the paradigm towards the left or the right. And there are very few people that want to actually break it. But I think that's what we need to do. And I think that's really what the thing is. How do you get the caged chimp to rebel against its incarceration? Is really, how do you get people out of a rut? How do you get them out of homeostasis when we're heading, you know, towards destruction? Yeah. Did anybody see the Roger Hallam thing with Kevin and Black Band News?
Not yet, no.
Yeah, I thought I was very disturbed by that. I must admit, I guess it was Roger was late at night or something, and he spoke more honestly or something. Maybe he was a little bit fried or something, but I never heard him talking so honestly about the big picture, and it was deeply disturbing. Sophie, did you find it disturbing?
I haven't watched it yet. I'm going to watch it this evening. There's so much to process in the things you post, because I try to watch them all or to read them. So I have to do it a little bit at a time, because it's very it's a lot. But I will definitely tonight, because after that, next week I'm going to go on a sort of digital detox. I'm going to just cut off for a week, except phone and email. But other than that, I'm going to catch up with all the stuff that you have posted, thankfully, because, you know, I mean, there's so many useful things, Hugh. I'm very thankful for all the research and the time you spend at that. I don't know how you do it, honestly.
It's
I don't know.
quite an exciting time. It's been, I mean, there've been so many things that might be portentous events, you know, happening.
Yeah.
Really seems like things are coming to a head soon.
We had the same story. We had the same story.
Same.
There was a guy, a virologist in last spring, who started the story about the chloroquine, the hydroxychloroquine, same thing with the media, same hammering. It's just that he came a bit earlier, so for a while he was able to come on the main things. The vaccine wasn't there yet, but they did the same witch hunt and the same kind of scapegoating. The mechanism is universal.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think probably this is where Trump muddied the water a lot, because he was just pulling things out of his hat without any kind of knowledge about what he was talking about. And I think that's just unfortunately set everybody up to be highly reactive against any kind of alternative suggestions. Because I think Trump actually did talk about hydrochloroquine, didn't he? And some other things. I can't remember now.
Yeah, and
He
bleach.
did. Yeah, but it's very easy to say everything Trump said was shit. I mean, there's another black and white polarizing thing. To just every time Trump opened his mouth, everybody went, nobody listened to actually what he said. I don't know what percentage of what he said is bullshit. I'm not qualified to say that, but it's the same thing with him. I have no sympathy for Trump. And if I was an American, I don't think I would have ever voted for a guy like that. But it's the same thing. He's scapegoated too, if you think about it.
Yeah,
I mean,
but I mean, I can see why the 74 million people voted for him, because people are, it's gone too far basically in one direction, and people want want it to be taken back something. It's I can see why, but Trump is just a complete psychopath out for himself, and he just grabs things off the shelf that he thinks might support.
But even psychopaths sometimes can say true things. Do you know what I mean? It's just
that's right. It's like a broken clock is right to at least twice a day, but in this case, it's like this clock is never right. Yeah, it's unfortunate because I think that there are some things that are not right in point of fact, but they, as I said last time, in point of principle, they are correct. So that kind of gets swept aside in the fact that what he's saying literally is not true, but in some ways there is some truth to it, and so the baby's being thrown out with the bathwater, and I think it might be maliciously done that way. They almost relish the fact that he says something wrong because it hides the truth. The literal truth comes out correctly, but the bigger truth is lost in the minutiae. Yeah, I think more and more it's becoming like Macbeth, where Banquo's quote that I put up there was, they betray us, they win us with honest trifles to betray us in deepest consequence. And there's
the
so
instruments,
much of that, so much of that. There's people have literally, fact check tiny item true or false, and they're saying and then they say, oh, this is not true, and it's like, well, okay, not that specific thing, but you're writing off the whole thing. Basically, if you did a whole, manifesto, and you got one truth in it, oh, that's debunked. It's like, hang on, that's just one tiny little item out of the manifesto. What about the rest? And so basically you shoot down these whole zeppelins just with pellet guns for one single fact that fact checks that doesn't fact check true. So it's pernicious because it allows people to get away with a huge lying assumption based on a small truth or a small untruth.
It's like
a small untruth.
Some of the talks that Chris Hedges gave, where he was talking about the right in America and this sort of neo-Nazi thing, the Proud Boys, all this whole concatenation that was following Trump around, and it's just what you say. You're getting this reaction against it, but he was looking beneath it and saying, hey, this is the result of 40 years of erosion of workers' rights and lowering of standard of living, which has built up an enormous amount of pressure, and that is one of the substantial things behind this kind of extreme position that these people are taking. So, by sort of dismissing them, you're missing the underlying message, which I guess is, basically what you're just saying in another way.
Yeah, I think the Long March has been going on for ages, and then at some stage, there's a backlash and it gets knocked back, decades. But anyway, yeah. But there was something we were supposed to be talking about this time. What was
you were going to talk about the silver and the chimps. I don't know how you want to do. I wanted to lead into the chimp thing a little bit. Do you want to put that on hold for a while, or?
No. What did you want to say about the chimp?
I'll shut up after this because I've already said too much. I was thinking about, your question was, well, how do you free a caged chimp? And, of course, one of the classic examples was the one you'd given about the when they opened the gates of the concentration camp and everybody just stayed there. They didn't walk out. They could have done anything they wanted to, and they were all just sort of huddled inside still. And that sort of led me to thinking about Viktor Frankl and some of the others who have been through that experience. And it seems from my limited reading that one of the consistent things that people like Frankl have said is that the ones who survived were the ones who had something going on for them inside that the others didn't have. They were, maybe they had a higher understanding of things, or they had, even just down to having a profound religious faith, maybe they had something going for them that was enough to keep them alive and keep them surviving psychologically, so to speak. And then I just wanted to connect that back to the topic of the chimp, because, I could see the discussion was going to go into, well, how do we convince people to give up their addiction to the society we live in and bravely, sort of go where no civilized person has ever gone before. But it seemed to me that it was very much the same question and the same mechanism as that of spiritual awakening. Like, if you haven't let go of your egoic identification, you're not going to be able to let go of your addiction to society either. The two things are basically one and the same, really. So I don't know if you want to pick up there just from that point. That was basically where I wanted to get to.
Yeah, I never quite agreed with Viktor Frankl about the religious aspect or something like that. What my interpretation of it was, there was always something that people could depersonalize the situation. So it was a transpersonal. If it was a transpersonal experience, the trauma wasn't quite so bad. So, for example, like when I was doing basic training in the military, then it always amazed me that people took it so damn seriously, because the whole thing in basic training was just to break down your ego and then build you up again as a unit. That's what all basic training is for. It's a kind of a hazing ritual to kind of knock the shit out of you and de-egotize you so that you can form a bigger squad that has a bigger ego. But in that process, it always amazed me how personally people would take it, so that it would break them. They would do techniques like they would get two officers or basically training corporals, and they were instructors, and they would get a guy who they thought had attitude or was cocky or something like that. They would haul him out, and then they would give him conflicting commands and put him in a double bind. And if you know anything about the psychology of schizophrenia or something, a good way to make people schizophrenic is to put them in a double bind. So they would do that by simply just saying, oh, get down on your knee. So get down and give me 50 press-ups now. And the guy would get down. Another guy would say, the other instructor would be standing on his other shoulder. And I think they did this in Platoon. I think if you remember Full Metal Jacket or one of those movies, I think they did exactly the same. So as soon as I saw it, I kind of laughed, because it's obviously done in all military situations throughout the world. But then, the other instructor says, like, what are you doing down on the ground? Did I tell you to get down? Stand up. And then the guy says, stand at attention. And then the guy stands up, and then the other guy says, what are you doing? You haven't done 50 press-ups, you did 3, get down. And, basically the guy they would turn into a gibbering wreck, because they're getting these conflicting. And when it happened to me, I just, I knew what the game was, and I thought, like, everybody knows what the game is. They're just trying to fuck you up, and you just play along. I could never see why people took it so damn personally, and why it was impersonal. So, another example is, they would run you around in an impossible task. You could say run, 1.4 kilometers, and then everybody, the whole unit had to make it, and you couldn't make it in the time that they specified. And so then they'd say, okay, well, you have to run again, but you're getting tighter and tighter. So they make you run it again and again. You can't make the time, but it gets worse and worse. Everybody would get so distraught. They thought, oh, we're going to run till the end of time now because we'll never get over the finish line in the time. And it was like, I said to the guys, look, we know that basically PT lasts from 12 till 4 o'clock. At 4 o'clock, we have to go on to do the next thing. So it's like they'll fuck us around until 4 o'clock. Don't get so involved in the fact that we're not making the time or not. You know as well as I do that this shit is going to last from 12 o'clock till 4 o'clock, and then they're going to go on to some next shit. And nobody seemed to get that. They would get so into the fact that they couldn't make the time. And so they say, look, if you make the time, you just go on to the next exercise and they'll fuck you around. It's a new way, but it's going to go till 4 o'clock. So just play along. You don't have to make the time. Just miss it by 5 minutes. What's the guy going to do? He'll make you run again. Jog slowly and string it out till 4. And nobody thought of it like that way. I never could quite get why they didn't think. I think everybody knew in basic training, and they knew what the protocol is, and they knew what they were doing. So,
yeah, but I think that you can get it. You could get it, but you see, what Gary made me think of when he said is the chimp. Most chimps don't know there is a cage, so it's how to get them out. If you don't know there is a cage, why would you get out of it? I mean,
the first step is to. It's a bit like the missionaries. They say before you can save somebody, then you have to convince them that they lost. And so all missionaries would try and convince you that you needed God, and then they would, or you needed something, and then they'd give you Jesus. But everybody, all the chimps do know that this is not right. They do know that there's this continual kind of cloud over their heads, and there's this kind of headwind always in people's life, that life is this quiet struggle all the time. And it's like Jordan Peterson always saying like, said that life is suffering. That's what the religious people have always said. And that's what they do in religions, is they try and convince you that life is suffering, because, they don't want to tell you captivity is suffering, because it means you've got an alternative. They tell you life is suffering, so your only alternative is death. And so, but that's not true. Indigenous people don't suffer. We were taught in school how indigenous people suffered, and it's all a complete lie. When anthropologists will tell you that, indigenous people have a very easy life, and then they tell you, well, no, but they all died at 30. And so, no, that's a complete myth. They had higher child mortality, but they didn't die at 30. They lived as, if you passed about the age of 7, you would live as long as anybody else does today. But the only thing that modern medicine has given us is really epidemiology, or rather vaccinations and things like that. That's the only thing that's really extended our lifespan, and basically increased or decreased child mortality. But we kept on saying all of this stuff to say, the way you suffer now is natural, as if all animals are born to suffer. And it's like, nah. If you look in the natural world, animals are not suffering. I go just walking around this afternoon, looking at the seagulls and stuff around here, all the natural things around here, and it's like they're all having a gas. The wind is blowing, and they're having fun. All the animals seem to be having fun, except the people. And then they tell you, well, people are not supposed to have fun. It's like, why?
But in the cartoon that you posted that initiated our conversation a couple of weeks ago, this chimp was caged since birth, and he was not aware of the fact that he was in a cage, because he was only made aware of it maybe when he was brought back to the wild, and that's where the knot of the conversation should be, because you can't free a chimp that doesn't know he's caged. I don't think so. It's the cage that you have to concentrate on. Is the
You
mechanic?
have to introduce the concept of slavery. So one of the reasons they were very big in the South and actually in Africa too, in fact, even in South Africa where I grew up, they were very big on not teaching slaves to read. And the reason was that the John Brown's rebellion, slave rebellion in the South, was they attributed it to allowing him to read. And what they said was, because he learned to read and write, he learned what a slave was. And that led him to do a slave revolt. So they're saying, like, if slaves can't read and write, they don't know what a slave is. It's kind of like Dave Chappelle in that other thing about, those hookers. If they don't really understand how the pimping game works, they don't really, many of them think of themselves as hookers. That word, they don't associate with themselves. So it's true with most liberals, although they suffer under, under a system of labor extraction. They don't think of it that way because the labor extraction is very sophisticated. It's done through the financial system and it's very indirect. But when their life is shitty, they take it personally and they never associate themselves with slavery. So even though they're educated, they can read about slavery. In fact, I'll go further and say this, that if you study slavery and just say it's in college or something like that, they tell a different story to what slavery is. And we have this kind of cartoonish version of what slavery is. Even if you study it, in anthropology or social science or something, if you study, there's an agreed narrative that is very remote from us. It's almost a conspiracy so that people cannot recognize their condition as slavery. So slaves are made to be something remote and other, and I really, my hackles get up with a kind of racist or ethnic version of slavery, especially anything that says, associates slaves with black people. That really gets my back up because slavery, we're all slaves, right? And so to exceptionalize it and say, well, I mean, black people have suffered a lot more under slavery than white people, but it's all done by degree. So what it allows, the special casing or the exceptionalism of black slavery is really pretending that we're not slaves. It's something unique to black people and very remote. And I'm saying, like, it's nothing like that. I think that's an important disservice that higher education gives us, especially in liberal democracies. It fills people with white guilt, and as if to say, we've profited out of black slavery. And I say, no, we're under the same system. We're just on a different level of the hierarchy. But basically, the privilege feeds upwards. So basically, the exploitation is downward. And so, yeah, the beneficiary of the pig fat that's been burnt in the fire below us basically all graduates upwards. The wealth trickles up. So, yeah, sure, people on the higher social strata are beneficiaries, but they're no less slaves than anybody else in the hierarchy. And so I think that's one of the disservices of identity politics is this thing saying, well, no, it's a black issue, and say, no, I'm a slave too. You don't get to, have reparations and stuff like that. It's like, I want reparations. I came to America as an African American. I'm an African American. I came under an indentured system. I was brought under the H-1B visa system. And they strung that out deliberately. They made no bones about it, that while I was working there, I was underpaid at least 50%. And basically, they strung out the H-1B process until I got a green card for 4 years. It should have taken 2 years, but they deliberately strung it along, and they did that because the company I worked for paid for the lawyers very cunningly, and the lawyers knew which side the bread was buttered, so they strung the process out. And at one stage, one of the directors even admitted that they're stringing out the process because it's not in the company's interest to get it done quickly because it's going to cost them money. So I was brought in on that should say, yeah, I mean, nobody's going to give me reparations for all the time I was underpaid and deliberately underpaid. So basically, that's indentured servitude, and so you can do that under this capitalist system. But everybody is the same. It's basically undocumented workers are exactly the same. The reason why they have undocumented workers is, and they have the system they have, is because as undocumented workers, you can pay them less. And so it's kind of this double standard where we pretend that there's this American dream, and there's basically the path, the dream ticket path and stuff like that, and it's like it's all organized slavery to underpay people for their work. But the system couldn't function without illegal immigration in America, and nobody says that. Nobody comes out and says, one of the things that Trump's wall was doing was destroying the farms in the San Joaquin Valley and stuff, because they couldn't get workers for pittance anymore. And then there's people say, well, we'll be ruined because crops are going rotten in the fields because we can't afford to pick them. And they're, well, you have to pay them the price. Well, pay workers a price that will be commensurate with that wage in an open market. And of course, Americans would only pick fruit and tomatoes and stuff for serious amounts of money. It's really hard work. So if you paid people what the job is worth, then a burger would cost, $50 at McDonald's. And then basically people's health would go up, because basically an apple would be as bad as cheap as it is now, but a burger would be much more expensive. So people would be healthier. So the whole system is rotten. The whole thing about, once you start on an exploitative system like this hierarchy, it's a fetid, seething mass of mess. But it's very hard to tell people that, because they're reasonably comfortable. They've made the devil's bargain, and they've kind of settled. And so particularly liberals are the worst counter-revolutionaries, because they've kind of sold out for small change. They've yeah.
I would like to make a comment when you were saying, Hugh, about not taking things personally. I think because kind of like weaving in the threads of what we've been talking in this past weeks, because of competition, it's almost like we blame ourselves. If we fail, we there's a veil, and we don't see that, like you said, the system is rotten. And so, like as a white collar worker, I'm subject to all these articles and essays about how can you become more productive? How can you manage your time better? How can you compete better? How can you up your game? So we are slaves to that because of the competition, and we can't see that we're being exploited and being driven to some level of unachievable efficiency. So and then sometimes I ask myself, well, what's wrong with me? Why can't I why can't I produce more? Whereas, it's like we're just kind of slaves to, and then we don't have time to develop fully, because we're just trying to always compete and achieve in our own little niche of our work. That's the comment I see about weaving in threads of how competition and blaming ourselves personally and slavery.
Yeah, it's amazing, and it was deliberate, right? That they got people to have individual responsibility, so that it's kind of like a battered wife syndrome, so that they make all of us feel unworthy, and then basically we kind of, none of us are kind of quite making the grade, And the fact that we are not making the grade is nothing to do with the system or the scam they're pulling on us. It's nothing to do with the injustice of the system. It's our personal failing. So that's how the church and state works together. The church in particular has this idea of original and individual sin. So then, basically the Catholic Church as well has this, idea of confession, and it's exactly it's a cult. It's a standard cult technique. So it's used in things like the Scientologists will take confessions. They call it auditing, and they will take confessions from you, which are then recorded and used semi as blackmail against you. But the Catholic Church does the same. A priest in your local church would take confession from all these people, and of course he would get to know all the dirty secrets of the whole neighborhood, and essentially be able to blackmail. And I know in Greece the guys are able to molest kids because nobody can take them down because they know all the dirty secrets of everybody, and they can all cross-check it, and they've had it all through confession. So it's a dirty, dirty system. And the Catholic Church knows it. The Greek Orthodox Church knows exactly that's the power of the priest. But the priests in Greece, they're rich. They're rich buggers. And the reason why they're rich is they know everything that's going on, and they have tabs on everybody. They're kind of a bit like, the FBI and what's his name? Not McCarthy. Who started there? Hoover, yeah. He's basically got these priests have a file on everybody because they've heard it all through confession. And so it's like the Stasi, and the Catholic Church knows that. But the benefit of that for the state is that it makes people sinners, and then has them perpetually in a state of guilt. So it's very interesting, the word guilt. Guilt in Germany, the guilt is the same word as sin and debt. So basically what it is a debt system. The whole basis of this is to try and convince you that you have a debt. And the idea is that our primate brains have a very keen instinct of debt accounting. So, basically they're very clued into who groomed who and for exactly how long, and they keep meticulous accounts, primates, in their brains of exactly who owes who what, and so they use that system to pretend that we owe a debt that we just don't own. So every time if you pick up $1, that's in essence an IOU. It's an instrument of debt. But everything we have, from mortgages to car loans to just this individual sense of having to work hard to justify our existence, is working on this primate module in our brains that is primarily based on debt. And you can get people collectively to side with the state because they can easily say, oh, this person didn't pay their debts. They're a deadbeat dad. They're basically shirkers, or they're underperforming based on what the team does, or they've got a million ways of saying that this person owes a debt to society. And it's like, you don't owe anything to society. Society owes you. But then, you get Robert Kennedy or JFK coming along and saying, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. What he's saying there is like, hang a bit of guilt on, what you can do for America. It's like America's sucking the life out of you, and it's not returning anything. But that's the way the system functions. And so it's a very important part of a rebellion that people break that contract. And so one of the reasons why I try and get people to do a bit of monkey wrenching therapy is because that's a clear divide. It's a clear breach of this Hobbesian contract with society. So if if you work for a corporation, they stealing your labor. They basically, what they do is they pay you for your time and then keep your work product, knowing full well that your work product's worth a hell of a lot more than your hourly wage. Has to be, otherwise the company wouldn't be in profit. So they're taking your product and stealing it. Basically, that's what the capitalist system is all about. Now, we assume that we owe the company something, and we're very appreciative of the shortchanging wage that we get. So that's why Marx called it wage slavery. But the thing is, though, that we're being taken for suckers. We're basically, being used. Now, to break that contract, our perceived contract that we have a debt to the company or the country or something like that, is to do an act of sabotage against it. So you sabotage the workplace, and then basically that's a clear breach in your deep down in your monkey brain that is saying, basically, I'm doing an act of rebellion. Now, monkey brain is very strong in terms of rebellion, in terms of deceit, in terms of being Machiavellian, and also in terms of just ridicule. So our monkey brain is very keen on respect, and especially for a big alpha male. But it's just as keen. It loves, basically parody and for power figures to be brought down. So it loves that kind of cutting of the daisies just as much. So you can flip over what the monkey brain does by getting it to do an act of insurrection against the zoo. So if the monkey's caged in a zoo in a cage, part of the zookeeper's trick, or imagine it like a circus trainer, the part of the circus trainer or pimp or whatever is to keep the animals and the performers in the circus to feel they have some kind of undue obligation that they just don't have to the ringleader in the circus. But if you do even a simple act against that the entity that you're supposed to have a debt to, that's a clear breach, deep psychology of clear defection from that obligation, and you are essentially free as soon as you do that. As soon as you do a small act, not only do you feel great, it's the perfect cure for depression, but you feel empowered. You get serotonin, and you also from then on out on a much more of a power trip of getting revenge against an exploiter or a master. Now, this is if even a small percentage of people do that, the system can't function. If they do it in stealth, in other words, they do it in a wrecking thing, so that the system can't find the people and do retribution. Then the system falls apart very quickly. And you can see this because if it ever happens, if it ever breaks out in the system goes on apeshit high alert. Because if the people surreptitiously working against the system, whatever it is, whether it's a ship at sea or a military platoon or corporation, if people are defecting and working against the bigger social group, that can spread like wildfire. So I do believe that could be one of the big tipping points, and I don't agree with Roger Hallam that you get a whole bunch of people to have mass action and mass disobedience. What I'm talking about is disobedience, and I am talking about mass disobedience, but not the way that Roger Hallam is talking about, which is kind of a childish temper tantrum where you sit in the street, you cause disruption, and then you're kind of reinforcing the master-slave relationship it's almost childish because you're treating the power brokers as if they are your parents, and you're acting like a spoiled toddler going, I'm going to sit in the road till you do what I say. And that's not what I'm saying. If the toddler does it in stealth so that they don't know who's doing the disobedience, then that is far more powerful. That's basically what that is the beginning of, is the end of the whole system. Because if people, oh yeah, go ahead.
No, I agree 100% with what you're saying, but to go deeper in what we were talking about, I can understand that people who are aware of the system, how it's functioning, and can act in this way, and stealth and sabotage is all okay. But okay, there we're talking about people who are aware, but what we were talking about earlier is the cage, and most people will not do that out of guilt, number one, and number two, why would they do it? You see, there's something missing to get more people to rebel. And I'm not talking about the Roger Allen way, I'm talking about what you're talking about. Deep down, people have to feel that they're slaves, feel the cage. And I mean, I've been since my teens trying to tell people around me, hello, but it just doesn't work. I mean,
No, you can't tell people. No, you won't get anywhere if you try and get people to feel the cage. They have a vested interest in not seeing the cage because, for one thing, there's a sunk cost. So they've got a bias, basically not only a dependency bias, but a loss aversion. Because if you tell them that if they incarcerated and they are caged chimps, they have to admit that they've been fooled for their entire life. So it's much easier than basically taking that on board and saying, oh, you're right, I've been a complete schmuck for my entire life. It's much easier to just say, no, you're a threat and fuck off. I'm not taking your crap. You giving me cognitive dissonance. You basically challenging my worldview, and you're basically making me admit that I've been a stupid twat my whole life. So you won't get anywhere on that way. The way to go is it's kind of like aversion therapy. So aversion therapy, or the opposite, where you can't remember what the therapy is called, where you condition people basically with agoraphobia. You go very slowly and you introduce people slowly. So there's aversion therapy and there's habituation therapy. I can't remember what the correct word is, but you slowly habituate people like agoraphobics by tiny increments get introduced into coping with their phobia. So it's the same kind of thing. And one of the first things to do is rather than try and convince people they're in a cage, is to go slowly and try and give them a taste for freedom. So, for example, anything to do with novelty will help them with freedom. So the exercise I gave you of just relaxing, and we should go over that again soon in one of these things, if you remind me, not now, but for other people that might be listening to these videos, is to introduce something like novelty. So here's an exercise, and I think maybe we should do this exercise during the week and come back next Sunday and just say what happened. But I would suggest that all of us go and have a look at the things that we do habitually. So when you put an animal in the zoo, they tend to pace up and down. They go psychotic, and they pace up and down in the cage, and they do these repetitive behaviors. And humans do too. The commute back and forward to work is one of these repetitive behaviors that is like pacing up and down the cage. It's semi-psychotic, but people do it en masse. And so when you do that, you'll find that you do it in a very automatic response. So you basically very fixed action. So it's like a fixed action potential, and you do the same thing in the same way. And it's very tedious, it's very boring, and it's giving you a little bit of cortisol. It's basically bringing your mood down, your energy down, and making you feel rather shitty inside. So what I'm talking about is the very, very specifics of these tiny repetitive behaviors. So, for example, if you used to commute to work, you'll notice that you have a ritual and this routine where you go out of the door. You will notice that you always have your eyes in the same place as you go down the 3 steps in your porch, perhaps, or when you put the keys in the lock of your car. You always do it the same way with the same hand, looking at the same spot. And to introduce you to a bit of novelty, try and do something deliberately novel each time you do all these actions. So, for example, do apeshit stuff. Just when you put the key in the door, have a look over your right shoulder, or do anything you don't normally do. When you go down the 3 steps, you're always looking down the 3 steps. Look up and to the left or something like that. See if you could do it with your eyes closed and just hearing. So introduce novelty into these repetitive action behaviors, which are very unnatural. No animal should be doing this shit. These continual repetitive routines are just fucking, they're just inhuman. But they've conditioned us to do them from early childhood. And it's called socializing, and it's part of schooling. But to desocialize yourself, start doing anything unusual that you never normally do. So if you sit in a cafeteria, go and sit with somebody you would never dream of sitting with. Go and sit on the other side of the cafeteria where you don't normally sit. Whatever you do, just to start doing novel things and start to enjoy the novelty. And what you'll find is that, well, I don't want to preempt your discoveries, but what you'll find is that you start having a whole new world open up inside all this routine of behavior, and that's the first step of sampling a tiny taste of freedom. That after a while doing that exercise and this one I've just given you, and the relaxing exercise, you can start to get tastes of freedom. And at some stage, you'll notice that you're on a different kind of trip to everybody else. It's very important to say when people are talking, or you're talking to somebody, or you're talking to the boss, or talking on the phone, or doing something you do repetitively, is just attend to something different. Attend to, say, whenever you talk to your boss, you might notice that you're always attending to their voice, or you're always looking them in the eye, or you're always looking at their necklace or their tie or their lapel or their hair, and say, do something different. Just turn away and look out the window or something. Just you'll be amazed if you consciously try and build up all these little bits of novelty. You can build novelty in your day, and you'll be surprised. But anyway, give it a go and see what happens. But I think that's a better route to go is to give people little tastes of freedom. And yeah, some people want novelty. They crave novelty, and they naturally feel caged. But for people that just feel down and don't really know why, it helps to just give them each one of those things. Actually, it gives you a little spike of energy, and so that spike of energy is worth a big loss to Big Pharma. Basically, they're making money out of Zoloft and all these SSRIs, serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Basically, they're selling you your own serotonin. Basically, what all those pharmaceutical companies are doing, they're selling you a plug to plug in your synapses, so the serotonin can't be reabsorbed. In other words, you've got more of it floating around. So they don't give you more serotonin; they just stop you soaking it up, and that's what all SSRIs, all these psychotropic drugs for making happy pills, they're all serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So if you do this exercise, you'll start to get serotonin naturally, because you'll get more serotonin, not that you will get it less inhibited, or you won't get it reabsorbed as quickly, but because you just have more because of the novelty. Serotonin is also a novelty hormone, and is where we're supposed to get it from is from the natural environment. It really comes from food. So it's really supposed to be this thing that gets us out of bed and gets hunting because we're hungry. We go down to the river and we go into the forest to find fruit and all of this stuff because we have a lack of serotonin, and it drives us forward. And then as soon as we get a peach or something, we sink our teeth into it, get loads of serotonin out of the peach, literally. So that's our reward mechanism, and so we can't really go to the store and get a peach in the same way. There's just not enough work involved in work and reward. But you can do it consciously, like I told you, and do it for free. Just all the little actions that you do all day, just try and tweak them a little bit. Do something novel, and then when you get used to that, go bigger and do more and more novel things. Yeah.
Hugh, just thinking about what you were saying, that you're in your routine, but in order to do some of the things that you've suggested, aren't you having what amounts to a momentary awakening? You've got to have that remembrance. It's got to come from outside your ordinary habitual mindset. So for a moment, you've got to be kind of outside yourself to think, oh, I'll turn the other way, or I'll walk in the other direction, or sit in the other place. It's like just a brief awakening.
Gary, you always give the game away. Yes, that's exactly what it is.
But I wanted to. Sorry,
going back to Viktor Frankl, right? Basically,
yeah, that's where I wanted to go.
The way that you get aloof. You see,
Yeah.
part of the thing that I'm not telling you, I didn't explain until now. You forced me to, is that you have to remember that Hugh told you to